Mike, and I'm... Oh, fuck, roll the fucking thing. Oh, God, I'm gonna be sick.
The Hobbit was published on September 21st, 1937. Written by the godfather of contemporary fantasy himself, J.R.R. motherfucking Tolkien. Set in the fictional world of Middle-earth, the story focuses on the experiences of one Bilbo Baggins as he accompanies a party of dwarves on an expedition to reclaim a vast wealth of treasure from the covetous dragon known as Smaug. Along the way, the Hobbit discovers he's made of harder stuff than he'd ever imagined, and inevitably sets in motion a chain of events that throws the entirety of Middle-earth into war. In 2012, the first and honestly the best movie in what will become a trilogy was released in theaters across the country entitled The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey. This movie will be the focus of today's episode, which I will be comparing to the book quite frequently because who doesn't love a pedant? The movie starts with a beautiful tribute to Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, wherein Ian Holm reprises his role as Bilbo Baggins, despite the fact that he and Martin Freeman look and sound nothing alike. Joking aside, this is a very digestible repetition of form. The Lord of the Rings starts with a brief history of the Rings of Power and the subsequent war that explains the context of the movies. And The Hobbit begins with a very similarly fashioned history of Erebor and the dwarves. Wait a second. That dwarf lady ain't got no beard. Somebody didn't do their homework.
It's true you don't see many dwarf women. And in fact, they are so alike in voice and appearance that they're often mistaken for dwarf men.
It's the beards.
Oh yeah, you thought you were just gonna sneak it in there, but guess what? I caught it. The tone in the first scene with Bilbo and Gandalf is confused, to say the least. Which is something I think the entire movie kind of struggles with. In the book, the scene is intense, at least from Bilbo's perspective. And the story is told from Bilbo's perspective. I think that's a point I need to make. Tolkien describes an edge of severity to Gandalf's temperament that Ian McKellen sadly lacks. Mostly on account of just being affable as fuck. But this problem persists throughout the entire movie. It can't seem to decide if it wants to capture the serious and dark tone that the Lord of the Rings trilogy abides by, or if it wants to lean into the more kid-friendly comedy musical stuff that Tolkien himself had really intended for the source material. This is a book for children, so the movie, realistically, should be for children, right? Right, cool, good talk. Anyway, Gandalf decides that Bilbo is the perfect hobbit for the job, and so the wizard marks his door with a strange symbol. That night, 13 dwarves show up and raid his larder and proposition the hobbit to accompany them on their journey to Erebor. And to help him make up his mind, they sing songs.
That's what Bilbo Baggins hates! Tuck the clock, turn the back, leave the home for the bedroom act.
Mind you, the book is full of songs. It was nice to see those things show up in the movie without the whole thing turning into a fucking musical.
Far over the misty mountains cold.
I'll be the first to admit it did come dangerously close a few times.
There's a merry old man beneath an old grey hill, and there they
brew a beer so brown the man in the moon himself came down one night to drink his fill.
That wasn't even in the books. I don't know where that shit came from. Although they make a pretty good pitch, the company does fail to entice Bilbo to join them, at least at first. It's not until the following morning, when they've already left, that Bilbo decides, hey, he wanted to tag along after all. Along the way, Balin tells a story about how badass Thorin is, and I'll get into that later. This sets up the main antagonist for the trilogy. Yeah, that's right, it's not Smaug, it's this guy, Azog, the Defiler, the Pale Orc, Lefty McStumperton. I may have made that last one up. Anyway, after being ousted from Erebor by Smaug, the dwarves sought to reclaim the seat of Khazad-dûm in the mines of Moria, only to discover that a bunch of goblins had already claimed it as their own. Thorin's grandfather, Thror, is slain in the ensuing combat by Azog, and so Thorin cuts off the Pale Orc's arm, rallying his troops to a hollow victory. None of which is in the book, but we'll talk about that later. Meanwhile, the movie introduces Radagast, who I fucking love. The brown wizard comes to the conclusion that his forest is being affected by witchcraft. And after using his wizardry to scare off some spiders and save his hedgehog buddy Sebastian, Radagast rushes off to investigate the source of the evil magic. Then, Thorin decides to set up camp for the night in the ruins of a recently destroyed farm, against Gandalf's advice, so the wizard wisely fucks off. Then, Bilbo, along with Kili and Fili, discover that trolls have been stealing their ponies. Bilbo tries to steal them back and gets caught, so the dwarves have to swoop in and save his ass. They even appear to be doing a pretty decent job of it, until this happens.
Lie down your arms, or we'll whip his off.
And they decide they'd rather not see Bilbo quartered. Bilbo tries to stall the trolls, and Gandalf shows up to save the lot of them. In the movie, Gandalf shatters a boulder that's shielding the trolls, thus exposing them to the dawning sun, turning them into stone. But in the books, Gandalf actually calls the dawn to appear, because he's the motherfucking keeper of the sacred flame of Anor. The ring he bears is a symbol of the sacred flame that gives life to all things in Middle-earth, and strikes fear into those things that dwell in the shadows. But yeah, whatever. This is cool too, I guess. Next, they find some fancy elven swords. Glamdring, the foe hammer, and Orcrist, the goblin cleaver. Also, Gandalf finds Sting. That's right, Gandalf. Not, you know, Bilbo. Anyways. Then Radagast shows up. He's been looking for Gandalf, and he tells him what he found in Dol Guldur. Let me take a second to just praise this. This is the kind of embellishment that I fucking love, because it gives you a play-by-play of some stuff that's talked about in the book, but never really described in any sort of detail.
I saw him, Gandalf, from out of the darkness. The necromancer has come.
Who did you tell about your quest beyond your kin? Who did you tell? No one, I swear. We have to get out of here.
We can't! We have no ponies!
I'll draw them off.
These are Gundabad wargs. They will outrun you.
These are Roscabel rabbits. I'd like to see them try.
What the fuck is happening? Hot on the heels of something that works perfectly is something that falls utterly flat.
Come and get me!
Quickly! There's more coming! This way, you fools!
It's hard to feel like the dwarves are in any kind of real danger in this situation. Then Deus Ex Elrond. Gandalf has to force Thorin and company to go to Rivendell, when in the book it's just kind of accepted as a necessary stop on the road to Erebor. And Thorin holds no resentment towards Elrond in the book the way he does in the movie. I personally feel like this is kind of done to avoid confusion over Thorin's hatred of the elves from Mirkwood. But this reductionist approach just makes Thorin seem like a narrow-minded racist asshole. Anyway, Elrond informs Gandalf, Thorin, Balin, and Bilbo, for whatever reason, that there are moon runes on the map of Erebor that speak of a secret entrance.
Stand by the grey stone when the thrush knocks, and the setting sun with the last light of Durin's day will shine upon the keyhole.
Durin's Day.
Durin's Day? That's not in the book. Whatever, moving on. Meanwhile, atop the watchtower of Amun-Sul, where Frodo catches that nasty bite from a Morgul blade wielded by the Witch King of Angmar himself in the Fellowship, there's a dumb scene where Azog shows the audience how evil he is. Did I mention that this scene's dumb? Also, the scene with the council is equally dumb. Galadriel doesn't need to be here, and neither does Saruman. Seriously? Christopher Lee is so old. What are you doing? That's gotta be like a human rights violation. At least you let him sit for most of his screen time. Saruman tells Gandalf that the dwarves cannot go to Erebor, but Gandalf really doesn't give a fuck about what Saruman thinks because the dwarves have already left. So fuck you, Saruman, you old white bitch. Walking montage, punctuated by this stone giant fight scene where Thorin saves Bilbo's ass yet again, nearly dying himself in the process, and makes no mystery about his feelings on the Hobbit's continued involvement with the company.
He's been lost ever since he left home.
Then they seek refuge in a cave that turns out to be the front porch of the entire Goblin Kingdom.
Search to the back. Caves in the mountain are seldom unoccupied.
There's nothing here.
Somebody rolled a natural 1 on their investigation check. Bilbo tries to leave, but is stopped by Bofur, and they have one of the most genuine exchanges in the entire movie.
You're part of the company.
I'm not though, am I? Thorin said I should never have come, and he was right.
I don't know what I was thinking.
You're homesick. I understand.
No, you don't.
You don't understand. None of you do. You're dwarves.
You're used to this life, to living on the road, never settling in one place, not belonging anywhere.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't...
No, you're right. We don't belong anywhere. I wish you all the luck in the world.
Then this happens, and somehow miraculously, nobody's impaled. Bilbo manages to slip away amidst the ensuing chaos, but then proceeds to draw a glowing blue sword. Boo! He may as well have started singing a song, for fuck's sake.
Down, down, down in Goblin Town.
Not you, Ferdy.
Question, a smack, and a whip and a crack. Everybody talks when they're on the rack. Down, 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 down to Goblin Town.
Shut the fuck up! Seriously, if we could just get less screen time for this CGI abomination, that would be great.
It's an abomination!
Abominations, mutations, deviations. That's all you're gonna find down here.
Get the fuck up! They are in league with elves!
Made in Rivendell. Second age. Couldn't give it away.
What the fuck is happening right now? We just get to the part where the Goblin King recognizes Thorin and sends Salacious Crumb with a message for Azog. Meanwhile, Bilbo watches Gollum kill and eat this goblin and discovers the ring. But apparently hasn't learned his lesson about how easily identified a glowing blue beacon is. Bilbo, realizing it might be his only way out, accepts Gollum's challenge over a game of riddles.
Riddles in the dark.
One of the most memorable scenes in the book is handled with the same ham-fisted dexterity as the rest of this fucking movie. The tone is confused and fails to capture the depth and significance of Tolkien's writing.
If Baggins loses, we eats it whole.
Gollum's thinking face is the most Andy Serkis thing ever. You put fart sounds over it and it looks like he's baking some brownies. Anyway, Bilbo wins the contest of riddles, but Gollum figures out that Bilbo has the ring, and he decides to attack him instead of showing him the way out.
Bones will be shattered, necks will be wrung, you'll be beaten and battered. From racks you'll be hung, you will die down here and never be found. Down in the deep of Goblin Town.
Put a muzzle on it thing. Bilbo, still on the run from Gollum, accidentally puts on the ring the same way Frodo does in the Fellowship, might I add, and discovers that it makes him invisible. Then back to this CGI riddled getaway scene. Now, this shit bothers me not just because it's a CGI smorgasbord, but earlier in the film, they were outmatched by a much smaller party of wargs. And at the time, they were rolling 2 wizards deep. They're either badasses or they're not. Figure it out. You're back?
What are you going to do now, wizard?
Why? Oh, for this dumb guy.
Well, that could have been worse.
My thoughts exactly, Dwalin. Anyway, the dwarves bounce, and Bilbo spares Gollum out of pity.
It was pity that stayed Bilbo's hand.
And Gandalf rattles off the dwarves' name in case you forgot what they were. Of course you forgot all of their names. There's 13 of them. Balin, Dwalin, Keely, Feely, Owen, Glowin, Dori, Nori, and Ori, Biffer, Boffer, Bomber, and of course, Thorin. Bilbo is missing. The dwarves talk some shit about the Hobbit and pass the buck around as to whose turn it was to watch the pipsqueak. Then Bilbo reveals himself and explains why he came back.
That's why I came back, because you don't have one. A home. It was taken from you. But I will help you take it back if I can.
Knowingly shaming all of the dwarves for the assholes that they are. Then Azog shows up. The dwarves climb up some trees to avoid becoming warg food, but quickly realize that this was a bad idea, because of course it is. Gandalf does the old moth whisperer trick that he pulls in Fellowship, and Thorin spots Azog for the first time. So my biggest problem with this scene is that the orcs have archers. Shooting dwarves in a tree has got to be the fantasy colloquial equivalent to shooting fish in a barrel. Then Gandalf lights everything on fire because why the fuck wouldn't he? Then this happened. What the fuck was your plan, Thorin? Huh? Why would Azog tell his lieutenant to kill Thorin? Isn't his vendetta against him personal? Oh, no, I get it. Then Bilbo would have killed Azog, thus removing this totally pointless character from the trilogy. Actually, that's how it should have happened. If you're gonna have him in there, have him die, because bulk. Anyways, we'll get into that later. Where the fuck did the other wargs go? Also, how did the dwarves get out of the trees so fast to save Bilbo? And why are they back in the trees when the eagles come to save them? Ugh, this scene is a fucking mess. The eagles whisk the dwarves away to safety and fail to explain why they help at all. I guess since we saw that scene in Fellowship, we're just supposed to assume that Gandalf can summon eagles at random and not that the King of Eagles owes him a debt. Whatever, it's not important, I guess. Thorin's okay, and he yells at Bilbo, but then, aww. Meanwhile, deep in the bowels of Erebor, scenes I liked. Let's talk about how damn close to the book this movie is. Embellished? Sure, but it's amazing how much made it from the page to the screen. Some of the dialogue gets pulled right out of the book. And as someone who's read the book more times than you can count, it's awesome to see how much reverence the writers had for the source material. In this movie, at least. The first exchange between Gandalf and Bilbo is practically verbatim. And then there's this fun story about Bull Roarer Took.
In the Battle of Green Fields, he charged the goblin ranks. He swung his club so hard, it knocked the goblin king's head clean off, and it sailed 100 yards through the air and went down a rabbit hole. And thus the battle was won. And the game of golf invented at the same time.
It's that kind of attention to detail that really helps bring this world to life. And again, while the tone is more than a little bit confused, I think this movie does a pretty good job of capturing the essence of the book. Martin Freeman is an awesome choice for Bilbo. Let me just gush for a second. Dude totally nails the character. We see essentially the same transformation Bilbo undergoes in the book, only a little more accelerated. He goes from being a callow creature of comfort to a brave little orc sticker. While in the book we don't really see Bilbo's transformation begin to take place fully until he has to rescue the dwarves from the spiders in Mirkwood, this moment pretty much accomplishes the same effect. Radagast the Brown. This character's fucking gold. I always wanted to see more of the other wizards of Middle-earth, and this movie does a great job of introducing Radagast.
Roscabel rabbits.
Shut up, man, don't be lame. I'm trying to tell him how cool you are. While he doesn't have a whole lot of screen time in these movies, his scenes lay the groundwork for some pretty cool shit that pays off later in the trilogy, which had a profound effect on me as a lifelong fan of Tolkien's work. To understand what I mean, you'll have to watch the next couple of episodes. Let's talk about the stuff I didn't like. The dwarves look like propagandized caricatures of Jews. The sickness of the mind that Bilbo addresses in the expositional history lesson at the beginning of the movie that overcomes Thror near the end of his reign, and eventually Thorin as well in the third movie, is really just a metaphor for greed. Also, they lose their home and they're forced to wander Middle-earth, similarly to how the Jews wandered through the desert with Moses for 40 years after fleeing Egypt. They're hairy and big-nosed, and Jesus Christ, do I need to go on? It's almost as bad as the fucking goblins in Harry Potter. Azog the Defiler never swore to wipe out the line of Durin. He's only mentioned in The Hobbit one time to inform the readers who killed Thorin's grandfather, Thror. He does show up in the history of Middle-earth, wherein they refer to him as a goblin and not an orc, but whatever. Azog kills Thror, which starts a conflict known as the War of the Dwarves and Orcs. I know. Pretty specific, huh? And real creative, too. Wherein a pretty large number of dwarves were killed in an attempt to retake Moria and the seat of Khazad-dûm. At the climax of that war was the Battle of Azanul-Bazar, wherein Thorin's cousin Dain decapitates Azog, rallying the troops to a hollow victory. In the film, Fallen asserts that it's Thorin who killed Azog, not his cousin. Also, they fail to explain why the dwarves don't just hold up in Moria after they won it back from the goblins. I guess we know why. And it's also kind of weird that Balin's telling this story when we know what happens to him.
Here lies Balin, son of Hundin, Lord of Moria.
Azog isn't in The Hobbit, but his spawn, Bolg, is. So why not just have Bolg be the antagonist? Introduce Dain early. You can still have that CGI bukkake fight scene, except now you introduce Dain and you can tease the Balrog. In a trilogy that seems to really get off on foreshadowing events that come later, why not lean into that? It's just ham-fisted storytelling. Let's talk about what I would have changed. Now again, I'm just some asshole on the internet talking about stuff that's not even fucking part of the zeitgeist anymore. So climb down from your fucking high horse and just hear me out. You gave us Bilbo's arc way too soon. Now, it works in the context of the movie, I will admit, but there are 2 more fucking movies in this trilogy, and they're still called The Hobbit. So where exactly is our protagonist supposed to go from here? As I mentioned before, in the book, Bilbo doesn't really find his courage until after he has to rescue the dwarves twice in Mirkwood. Once from giant spiders, and again from some surly elves. So here's how I would have done things a little differently to give Bilbo a little more room to grow. You can still have Bilbo save Thorin like this. But instead of having this happen...
What were you doing? You nearly got yourself killed. Did I not say that you would be a burden? You would not survive in the wild, and you had no place amongst us. I have never been so wrong in all my life.
Thorin should unload all that scorn and just leave it there. This accomplishes 2 things. The audience still gets to see Bilbo become emboldened and courageous, but he still has to convince Thorin that he's not a reckless fool, who will continue to put the company and himself in grave danger. And Thorin suddenly becomes a more complicated character, because even though Bilbo saved his life, Thorin still resents him. Maybe because the Hobbit saving him hurt his pride. Or maybe he's having more complicated feelings about Bilbo's continued involvement in his quest. Maybe he's too ashamed to admit he was wrong about the Hobbit. Near the beginning of the movie, Thorin tells Gandalf,
I cannot guarantee his safety. Understood. Nor will I be responsible for his fate.
But he contradicts himself on this point, saving the halfling's life on at least 2 separate occasions.
Lay down your arms, or we'll whip his off.
So maybe Thorin is still struggling to understand Bilbo, which gives their relationship so much more room to grow. You know, given that there's still 2 more movies in this fucking trilogy. But hey, all this bullshit, it's just my opinion. Thanks for watching this YouTube review. I had so much fun writing and making this. If you love The Hobbit and can't get enough Lord of the Rings, stay tuned, because I got 2 more episodes coming your way, because there are 2 more movies in this fucked up trilogy, and I got a lot of fucking opinions about it. The Clearing the Queue theme song and a lot of the original music used in this episode was written and recorded by my good friend Chuck Miller, and you can find a link to his SoundCloud in the information below. And, you know, thank you again so much for watching. And again, stay tuned, because I got more opinions about stuff, and I'm gonna talk at this camera right here. You might try and stop me, but you can't.